All right, good day, everybody. As you well know, we have started talking about our topic for chapter 7, the Hebrews and Judaism. And remember from our previous discussions, the Hebrews and the Israelites are both referencing the same group of people, that being the nation that followed after the one true God, the one God that is the basis of the monotheistic religion. And then today, Judaism still follows after those teachings and the history of those people. So let's move on. Hopefully you have opened up in your drive already, chapter 7, Hebrews and Israelites guided notes. They are the Google document that we have started. So please go ahead and open that up, and I'll give you just a second if you have not to go ahead and get that ready, and I will proceed. All right, since you have that up, let's go ahead and start with this map that we looked at in the beginning. As you can see, the ancient areas of Mesopotamia and Egypt that we have already covered, but also there along the Mediterranean Sea, or on this map noted as the Great Sea, we see the land of Canaan. This land that was promised to those who followed God, and it began with the promise to Abraham that he would be the father of many nations. And as we look at this about Abraham, we see that the Old Testament tells us, or the Torah, remember that's a key term meaning the first 5 books of the Old Testament, that Abraham was born in Mesopotamia in the city of Ur, and he was instructed by God, and it is quoted in the book of Genesis as, "Go forth from your native land and from your father's house unto the land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation." And this story explains how the Israelite nation began with the descendants of Abraham. So he, in essence, even if you go all the way back in history to Adam and Eve and creation, this promise was made to Abraham by God that he would be blessed and his descendants. So let's look here on your guided notes at number 5. Abraham's grandson named Jacob, so there where you see the red underline, go ahead and type that information in. He raised 12 sons in Canaan. Their families became known as the 12 tribes of Israel. So notice here, Jacob's name was changed to Israel, and that is why we see the Hebrews also referred to as, later on, the Israelites. So going forward in this presentation, we will look at the Hebrew nation as being called the Israelites, those who are descendants from Abraham, his son Isaac, and his grandson Jacob, or as his name was changed, to Israel. Now notice this map here of the 12 tribes of Israel. Notice how they are spread out along the land of Canaan. These are the areas of the 12 sons of Israel, and the land was divided amongst them. Now let's look at number 6. Instead of covering the entire history of the Israelite or the Hebrew people, we are covering it in a broad sense. So over the years, the nation of Israel goes through many different hard times, but also good times. They experienced a famine, and during that famine, many of the Israelite nations went down to Egypt. Of course, we studied Egypt and the Egyptian empire that was strong at the time. So in Egypt, number 6, the Israelites, we learned, became slaves. So they were enslaved by the Egyptian people to do many works that may be present in Egypt today. In order to prevent the Israelites from rebelling, the Pharaoh ordered all baby boys to be thrown into the Nile River. The Pharaoh's daughter, though, found a baby in a basket on the riverbank, and she named him Moses. Now Moses was raised as an he was raised as an Egyptian, but yet his true heritage was that of an Israelite. And he came to find that out a little later on in life. He ended up leaving Egypt. Moses went into the wilderness and herded sheep outside of Egypt. And then number 7, but around the year 1200 BC, he saw a burning bush. That's the information to type in there. A burning bush from God, and it was believed that he was telling him to lead the Israelites out of Egyptian slavery. Here you see an image. Now this is just an illustration of maybe some of the hard labor that the Israelite people were instructed or commanded to take part in. Many of the building projects that you may see throughout Egypt, definitely not the Great Pyramids or any of the other things that date back to the Old or Middle Kingdom period, but newer items and newer architecture during the New Kingdom. Now number 8. Moses then goes back to Egypt, and the Bible states that God sent plagues, that's your first blank there, to trouble Egypt, because the Pharaoh was not willing to let this nation that was really serving to him as slaves just walk freely. He liked being able to have this at his disposal, and so God sends a series of plagues in order to try to change his mind. Now, after each plague, he continued to not change his mind, and therefore the last plague was instructed that all the firstborn children, except for those of Israelites who marked their doors with lamb's blood, would be saved. And this is called the Passover. So picture taking blood and smearing it all around the outside of the door. And what happened is during the night, as the Spirit of God came through to kill those firstborn children, if blood was present, then the Spirit of God would pass over and save that household. And so those Israelites were instructed to put the blood over the doorpost, and therefore saving the Israelite children. Here's an image really detailing the 10 plagues, anything from water to blood to things such as frogs and lice and flies. The 5th one there, pestilence, or the killing of animals, boils, hail, locusts. Number 9, darkness. Remember, the greatest god of the Egyptians was the sun god, Ra. And so the Almighty God, in order to show his power, created darkness all over the land. And then last of all, 10, the slaying of the firstborn, was when the Pharaoh ultimately changed his mind and let the Israelite people go. So number 9 on your notes page. Following the last plague, or that of the killing of the firstborn, the Pharaoh let the Israelites go. Now number 10. After the Israelites fled, the Pharaoh changed his mind. Okay, he regretted what he had decided, so he sent soldiers after them. The Bible talks about how God parted the Red Sea so the Israelites could pass and avoid capture by the Egyptians. Now, the exact location of the parting of the Red Sea is unknown. I will show you an image on the next slide that shows the probable route, especially through the wilderness, but the exact point in which the Israelites crossed the Red Sea is still undiscovered today. Number 11, while in the wilderness, so the Israelites, after crossing the Red Sea, they wander in the wilderness for many years, which we'll talk about in a second. But Moses received the laws from God while in the wilderness. Now these laws were known as the Torah, and these make up the first 5 books of the Old Testament, that being Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Recorded within the pages of those books, we see the history of the Hebrews and Israelites, and also the laws and instructions that was given for the people to Moses. And number 12, the set of things that is most familiar to most is that of the 10 Commandments. They are part of the Torah, and they have helped form the basic moral laws of many nations. The 10 Commandments, of course, are those such as thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not steal. And so those have helped to form the common laws of many nations today. Here you see the map titled The Wilderness Journey. So the red lines leaving out of the area of Egypt, crossing a portion of the Red Sea, and then wandering there on the Sinai Peninsula. Now, if you look to the south, near the Gulf of Suez, and go a little bit more to the south, you will see Mount Sinai, and that is where Moses received the Ten Commandments and the law from God. Now, number 13. After leaving Egypt, the Israelites did not just go back to the Promised Land, to Canaan's land. In fact, it took the Israelites 40 years to reach Canaan. Along the way, Moses died, and a man named Joshua took over. And you may say, well, does it take 40 years to travel from Egypt to Canaan? And indeed, it did not. But a lot of this was due to the Israelite people not having faith in God. And so they were required to wander in the wilderness for that lack of faith or belief. Now, number 14, when the Israelites reached Canaan, they found the Canaanites living there. The Israelites believed that it was God's will to conquer the people. So Joshua led them into battle. And if you're familiar with the story, God instructed them to march around the city walls of the city of Jericho, is there that you need to fill in for your blank, for 6 days. And on the 7th day, after blowing the trumpets, the walls of Jericho crumbled, and the Israelites were able to overtake the city. So the outskirts of the land of Canaan, Jericho, the city was overtaken by the Israelites. Here you see a map, and I have circled there in the yellowish circle the city of Jericho. So you see how this lay to the east, really the eastern border of this land of Canaan. And so the Israelites were able to come to the west and conquer the city. As you can tell here on the bottom, this says that this is an aerial view of Jericho today. So the trenches and the squares visible that you see are excavations that have taken place in this part. So you can still see today how archaeologists, historians are studying this ancient city of Jericho. Now, number 15. Joshua led the Israelites in 3 more wars. They were able to seize the land, and there again it was divided among the 12 tribes. Remember, going back to the idea of Abraham and his grandson Jacob, or Israel's descendants, we see the 12 tribes of Israel. So the land was divided back into the 12 tribes. Now, number 16. After Joshua's death, the Israelites looked to a series of judges for leadership. They did not necessarily have a central leader, but they looked to various judges to help them. They were usually military leaders who led one or two tribes. Okay, they were people such as Samson and others that you may have heard. One of the female and only female judge, Deborah, was also a judge of the Israelites. Now, number 17. Eventually, the Israelites won the hilly region of Canaan, and the Canaanites kept the coastal areas. The Israelites then built walled towns to protect themselves. And then last of all on this slide, number 18, this is a review point that we covered in our discussions on Mesopotamia. Remember the group of people that were Canaanites that lived along the Mediterranean Sea? They were called the Phoenicians. They were a group of this larger nation of Canaanites. And why were they important? Again, they developed an alphabet in which our English language derives from today. So the Phoenicians, as we studied earlier in Mesopotamia, of course this is the same region, we're just talking about it in a different area. The Canaanites and the Phoenicians were very influential in the development of our alphabet. Now, a group that was near the kingdom of Israel at this time were the Philistines. That's your blank to fill in on number 19. They were the strongest people in Canaan around the year 1000 BC, or 1000 years before Christ. The Israelites feared the Philistines, so they copied their ways, and they ended up worshiping their gods. So we see how the people of God again go away from Him and start to be influenced by these other religions that were polytheistic, or the worship of many gods. So, number 20, to keep from quarreling among themselves, or arguing or fighting amongst themselves, and to save their religion, the 12 tribes asked the prophet Samuel to choose a king. Israel wanted to be like every other nation around them. They wanted a king. They wanted somebody in power to make decisions, to defend themselves, to unite the people. Okay? So they asked the prophet Samuel to choose a king from his ability and his guidance from God. So you see there, a prophet is the blank to type in, is a person who claims to be instructed by God. But Samuel the prophet warned the Israelites against a king and did not choose one. He thought that this was not in the best interest of God's people to choose a king. However, number 21, the Israelites named Saul the first king of the united Israel. King Saul, though, displeased God. And so during his rule, God chose another king. God told Samuel to anoint David, is the second blank, to anoint him in secret. So Saul was the first king, and while he was still ruling, at a very young age, David was appointed as the next king of Israel. Here you see the land, and on this map you see Israel and Judah. Now this was all one kingdom at this point, but I wanted to show you this map to show where the Philistines lived. Notice there along the Mediterranean Sea, along the coast, was the land of the Philistines, and then the Israelite kingdom was to the east of it, or to the right of your screen. Here you see an image of an illustration of maybe what King Saul looked like. He was a very influential figure, a military leader, an important man to the people, and so that's why he was chosen as their king. He did follow after God for some time, but then found himself going away from God during his life, and that's what caused David to be chosen as the next king. Because as we see here, David, at a very young age, number 22, became a famous warrior. There was a giant among the Philistines named Goliath, who no one in Israel wanted to go to war with and to fight. But David was able to kill this Goliath with just a slingshot and a stone. But as you can imagine, that wouldn't be enough in itself to probably take down this giant of a man named Goliath. But yet it was through God's will and through God's purpose that he was able to defeat him. So for this reason, number 23, Saul put David in charge of the army. But later he grew envious or jealous of David and plotted to have him killed. So, the blank on number 23, David had to hide until Saul and his sons were killed, and then David took the throne. So even though David was anointed as the next king at a young age, it was much later before he actually became king, and that was after the death of Saul. The last point here on this screen, you don't have to fill anything out, but David drove out the Philistines and conquered other countries, further building his empire in the Israelite nation. Here you see a picture, an illustration again of what David may have looked like, a very handsome man. The Old Testament talks about how David was a man after God's own heart. During David's rule, number 25, the conquered people had to pay tribute, and that is kind of like paying money for them to be able to still maybe practice their own ways and to remain in their nation, but yet still be under control of the Israelites. And the Israelites also had to pay taxes. So David used this money to expand and to move the capital to the city of Jerusalem. And Jerusalem would become the most important city to the Israelites. Now later on we're going to have an activity dealing with some readings that you can find in the Old Testament. David, one of the most famous books in which he was the author of most of it, is the book of Psalms. Many of you may have looked at or read some of the things in Psalms before, and many of those were penned by the hand of David. Now, number 26, Solomon was David's son who took over the throne after David's death. So Solomon was David's son. After David died, he took the throne. He built the temple in Jerusalem that David had long wanted to build. So Solomon was the one who actually built a permanent place in which to worship God. Beforehand, throughout all of history, sometimes it was carried around in a tent. The laws of God was kept in it, and the people would worship there and sacrifice outside of it. But now Solomon was able to build a permanent building in Jerusalem. Solomon was also an author of several books in the Old Testament. Some were very important words and sayings that people use today. The book of Proverbs and also Song of Solomon, were written by Solomon. Solomon was a very wise man, and he was granted to be able to be given one thing by God. And he wished to be a wise person. And so God did grant him that. And Solomon was known as one of the wisest men in the area during his time, and maybe throughout history. Here you can see an illustration of the city of Jerusalem during David's time, as it was a walled city. It was surrounded also by valleys and other lands. You had to enter through different entrances in order to protect the city. Here you see an illustration of the temple that Solomon built, a very grand structure to show the importance of God, to show that the one true God was that important, because in other religions, these other gods and goddesses had great architectural sites built for them. And so Solomon was able to erect and to build the permanent temple in Jerusalem. Here is kind of a drawing that shows what the temple was made up of. You see the altar that would have been out front. Then inside you would have had various rooms, the holy place. And then there on the left of the image you see in yellow the most holy place. This was the most sacred place that only the high priest could enter and communicate and to petition God. Now, number 27, as we start to finish up what happened to the Israelite nation. Remember, Saul was the first real king. Before that, the Israelites had been guided by judges, and then by Joshua, and then Moses. But now, after Solomon's death, the 12 tribes began fighting amongst one another. The first blank there, 10 of the tribes moved to the north and called their nation the nation of Israel. So they called their nation Israel, should be the blank. So they kept the name Israel for the 10 northern tribes. The other 2 tribes broke apart and moved to the south, and they called their land Judah. That's the third blank to fill in there. The underlined point is Judah. The capital of Judah was the most important city where the temple was, and that was Jerusalem. And the people of Jerusalem were called Jews. So this is where we see the division of the kingdom. You had Israel to the north and Judah to the south. And those in Jerusalem and the kingdom of Judah became known as the Jews. Here you see a very simple map representing the divided kingdom. Israel to the north and Judah to the south. Now, number 28. After creating the divided kingdoms of Israel and Judah, many Israelites forgot their religion. The prophets, is your blank to fill in on number 28, told the Israelites to return to God's laws to create a just society. Now, some of the kings in Israel and Judah were good kings who followed after God, but many of them were not. And so for that reason, the Bible talks about how these nations would eventually be overtaken. And that's where we get to number 29. Now, as you notice, the remaining 3 points are different from what you see on your notes page. So what I would like for you to do, and this was my mistake, but delete the rest of the numbers on your notes, so the rest of the points. And what I've done is just included the final 3 points as sentences for you to type in. So they're all in red. So just start after number 28 with number 29. If you hit enter after 28, it should correct that. And just type in point number 29. The kingdoms of Israel and Judah felt threatened by surrounding nations. So I'll give you just a second here to go ahead and type that in on number 29. So here we see a graphic showing the divided kingdom. You see Israel on the left and Judah on the right. So these are the various kings and the prophets of these two kingdoms. As you follow down each of these, you will notice that they are eventually taken over by other nations, the Assyrians and the Babylonians. We talked about both of these when we talked about our chapter on Mesopotamia. And so the final 2 points will deal with who conquered who. So the last 2 things that I want you to type in, and I'll give you several minutes to do this, numbers 30 and 31. So again, you should have deleted or go ahead and delete the other points and type these in for 30 and 31. The Assyrians conquered Israel, first of all, and they dispersed or they scattered the 10 tribes throughout their empire. These Israelites lost their religion in following God. So first of all, the Assyrians conquer Israel, the northern kingdom. And then number 31, the kingdom of Judah, the southern kingdom, was eventually captured by the Babylonians. And there we get to King Nebuchadnezzar, again, or as some like to pronounce it, King Nebuchadnezzar. And thousands of Jews were taken to Babylon. This is called the Babylonian captivity. So the southern kingdom was overtaken by the Babylonians, and thousands were taken to the city of Babylon, and this was referred to in the Jewish history as the Babylonian captivity. So please take a couple of minutes to type in these final 2 points. Here you see on this map, you notice the first kind of the bluish outlined area was the Babylonian Empire about the year 1750 BC, so many years before Christ. But then if we fast forward to the pinkish areas, we see the Assyrian Empire around the year 650. So remember, the Assyrians overtook the Israelites. Okay, As you can see there, and about the city of Palestine, that is where Israel was located, and they were overtaken by the Assyrians. Then if you follow the pinkish actual lines, as you see on the map table, it says the New Babylonian Empire. So the Babylonians were the ones who eventually overtook the city of Jerusalem and the southern kingdom of Judah.